going to give it a few minutes for people to join, just in case, but then I'll just start going over the lab. Yeah, I'm teaching a course this summer, and I'm doing office hours remotely. So I'm like broadcasting on YouTube Live, and I'm waiting to start for people to join.
Oh my god, that's fun.
Fun. Alright, I'm gonna start now. So again, this, I'm on the laptop setup, and it's kind of terrible. So I'll probably walk through the lab, and then every so often I'll just tab back in here. Because I think for the first part I'll want the instructions a little bit. So again, I touched on this a little bit for the last office hours, but the kind of main intention with this lab was obviously to get some debugging skills in. Right, I know you've probably been debugging as you've been writing your code, and I always talk about how I love print statements for debugging, but I kind of wanted to just make everyone aware of like kind of these three core types of errors. And get everyone a little bit of experience debugging kind of code that wasn't necessarily theirs, right? So it's one thing to kind of like be able to debug your own code and write it, but then when you kind of like take on someone else's code, or when you're using a function that you may not be too familiar with, trying to find the errors there. And a lot of going through the process, I expected to print out X, but it's really giving me Y. Why, how come? And so hopefully this can kind of build up some of the skills, get you there. We're good. Yeah, so we kind of had this thing where you say what type of error it is, and then you describe what's causing it, real brief. And then, you can write your proposed solution. And again, if you submitted it and you fixed the code, in addition to just talking about it, that's fine. But you didn't necessarily have to do that. So I try to give you that example that I do believe I had a typo with for this first function, to kind of walk you through it. Hopefully it was clear. And these are the kind of three types of errors, right? So syntax error, if you right here, if you get your colon, if you have like an indentation error, if you don't close like a bracket or something, then you try to run the function, right? So we're in idle, and we're going to run it. It becomes super apparent that you have a syntax error because Python will just complain, right? So for this it should complain right there. Valid syntax even says, hey, syntax error. So that was a really easy one. I also don't think we included any syntax errors in there because they were almost like too much of a gimme, and I'm sure it's one that people likely encountered because even I still forget all the colons and indentation stuff. So that's one type. Runtime are kind of like the name might indicate, but it's like when you're running the function and actually running the code that it encounters an error in the function while you're coding it, or while it's running the code rather. So then it gives you that kind of error and it prints it out all nice in your shell right here. So it'll print out, go to line 3, you can't divide by 0, stuff like that. And then logical errors are one of these 3 errors that technically doesn't give you like the error message, right? You don't get the red text or the pop-up shell or anything, because this is more of like, hey, the logic of the function is incorrect, right? So you expect it to print x and y, but really it's printing like x, y, and z. So you need to kind of go through your code and figure out, hey, which variables are being assigned what, like what's the flow of everything, trace your code, and so you're doing that kind of debugging. So logical errors, like when you think you're getting one kind of output or return, but really you're getting another one. So that's probably a fairly common one type of error. So I just wanted everyone to kind of be familiar with those words, because I don't think we were made explicit that, hey, what you've been getting when you leave a colon off is a syntax error. It has that name on the pop-up, but you might not be aware of it. So now, for future courses, and especially for PUI, PUI, right, the follow-up course, you'll want to know this, because if Jason's talking about like, oh, the syntax error and so, I don't want that to be like a foreign concept, even though you be familiar with it. I just wanted you to know that vocabulary and get experience with the debugging, because that is 3/4 of programming, I feel like, is debugging. So good on the questions. So let's kind of dive in. So we'll skip over fun 0 because we already have that example in there. So this first one, the function below should return a string that is the concatenation of all the strings in the list. So if you give 1, 2, 3, it would return 1, 2, 3. And I'm just going to go ahead, and I think it's, when you're doing it, it's probably a little better for your learning if you try to work through the code and think about it before running it. But since at this point, presumably you've done the lab, we can just go ahead and do this. So, you run it and you get this, the red error text right here. So we didn't get the error until we actually called this function. So, we do have a runtime error. Put that there. Description, so this says must be string, not int, and it's a type error. So that I'm looking, okay, so I pass in a list of strings. I have this blank string variable called st, 4 element, and okay, so we're doing range now, so I know this is for the number. And so, okay, so if I think back to when we used range for the past 2 homeworks and for the section on for loops, I'll know when you're doing a 4x in range that it's going to give me a number. So maybe I'll do one is a number. If I was just debugging and trying to help my own code, you didn't have to do any of this kind of comments. So now we have a string plus an int, which is what it's complaining about, right? Because must be a string, not an int. So string for st, and then element is the int in this case. So we aren't able to return anything, because right here when we try to add a string and an int, we get this error. So then I would want to fix that, and what we actually want is the words. So if we're gonna keep it in that same fashion, we could do potentially something like this, right, where we're getting the index of the actual element. You could also change this and just do 4x and string list, which is actually probably would be my go-to solution maybe for this. But again, there's multiple ways. But if we do want the word in the list, I think we would do 4 word in string list probably, and that. And we'll see if that works. There we go. So it does look like it works. So a description of that bug was, adding string and an int. We weren't iterating through the list properly. But again, if you're just adding a string to int, that's fine too. Fix, modify the for loop. Or, right, if you're doing keeping it the same way for element range, then we're index into the list using element rather than adding it. So that's several ways you can do it, but we're just going to go with that one. There we Okay, good on questions. Actually, I'll just keep this up because I don't think we'll need the other one, so this way I can keep peeping the chat. Alright, so next function, this function below should return the number of iterations it takes to divide num a in half until it gets less than the value of num b. And so here's an example, right? 80 goes on 40, 20, 10, 5, 2.5, which is less. So you know we'll return 5 because 1, 2, 3, 4, and on the fifth one we are then below that other number. So let's maybe plug the example in. I believe that was it, and we're just getting a 0. So right, okay, it's definitely probably not right. So let's work through the code. So we have this count variable, which is 0, and so we also see we can return count. So presumably we are going to want count in our example case to get to 5, right? So at every kind of halving right here, we're going to want to increment count. So we look at the code. Okay, so if there's a while loop in there, we are halving it right here and incrementing count. So I'm like, okay, well, why would it still be 0 then? And then you can kind of assume, okay, well, if here's where we're incrementing count and it's still 0, then like this isn't getting hit, right? Because like if we're not adding to it, then it's still going to be 0. And if this line's not getting hit, then the division's not getting hit, which also means, hey, we're not even probably entering the while loop. And so then if you look at the while loop, num a in our example case was like, right, 80, and then less than, and so num b is 4. While 80 is less than 4, well, that's never going to happen. So maybe we want it like, the other way. Because if we look here, right, so num a is the thing we're dividing in 2. So we're actually, decreasing the value of num a over and over until it's going to get less than num b, which is the point of the function. So this is good that we're, slowly making this one lower. So eventually the condition will fail and we'll leave the while loop, and we're still incrementing count each time. So let's try that. There we go. Looks like we're getting the right answer that we need. So this type of error, we didn't get any of the red text feedback, or no pop-up saying it was a syntax error, because it did run technically, but it didn't give us the result we expected, right? Because the logic of the function was incorrect. So it's a logical error. Description, count. Something along those lines. And then the fix, make the while greater than instead of less than. You could have moved the numbers. Basically something about getting into that while loop would be the nice fix. Alright, carrying on. So for this third one, function 4, or function 3 rather, my zoom. The function below returns a list that contains all non-negative integers less than num that are a multiple of mult. For example, function 16 and 3 will return 0, 3, 6, 9, 12, and 15. Okay, so same thing. And we're just getting a list of 3s, which is one of my input parameters. So, maybe when I do that, I'm like, oh, that's kind of weird. Let's, Okay, so it looks like whatever I'm putting in for that second parameter is kind of getting thrown into this list, which is not the desired behavior. But again, it runs, it's just not correct, so that kind of goes ahead and tells us, hey, logical error. I can type today. So let's look. So we return this list, which we do need to return, right, because we need to return a list of numbers, but it just has the wrong number in there, as we can see. But it's good that we have a list, that's fine. And then doing a for loop, right, so for I in range, so we know I is going to be a number, because right, we're doing it in the range, I is a number, all the way up to this input, so the first parameter. So we're going through that, and so, okay, then I'm thinking we can get all the kind of multiples from that, because if we pass in 16 and we go from 0 to 16, we'll encounter a couple of the multiples for 3 along the way as we kind of count up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all that. So, the for loop seems fine, and we are also kind of like, we're hitting it, right? Because the list is getting appended to, it's just not maybe appending the right things. So let me look at the check. I is modulo mult equals 0, and so, we know modulo means that it's like the dividing with the remainder, so if we have no remainder, then we're good, right? Because it's like a clean multiple, but then if we do it 4 can go into 15 3 times, because it's 12, right? And then 15 minus 12 is 3, so that's why when we use this, that's our remainder. We've done modulo a few times. So that is a way to check for if it's multiple, but what are we adding? So we're adding mult, which is the second parameter, which kind of explains, right, well, we're just getting this big list of whatever second parameter we put in, because we're appending that, but really, we're going to want the I, right? And another thing you could also do is, like, if you were like, I know I is a number, but I'm not sure if it's going to give me what I want. I like doing kind of print statements like this. Run it. What's an example for this? 6.3. And so now I can kind of see this value of I and mult go up. So I'm like, okay, and it's not printing every I, it's only when it's the multiple one. When it's like multiple of 3 in this case. So it looks like I'm getting the right output in the list. I'm able to trace these variables with print statements, and it looks like that was the desired output, so we're good. So description, adding all the variable to list. This one. To I, you can say, appending the correct number, any of that kind of stuff. Not type. Yep, so that's that one. Alright, now we're on to the last one. Chat still seems fine. Function 4, the function below takes a list of ints as input to the function and should return a list that has all the even elements removed from the return list. So, we put in 1, 3, 5, 8, 10, 13. We would take out 8 and 10, the two even numbers, and just return those odds. Okay? I like that example, so we will continue the trend. List index out of range. Okay? Oh, I ran it. I got that error. It's not a syntax error. I'm getting this red detailed feedback. The runtime error. Description. So, we're getting a list index out of range error. So, just even if I wasn't really sure of exactly what that was, that means, I have a list, I know what a list is. I know indexing into a list, doing the brackets and 0 or 1 or whatever, and out of range. So maybe we're trying to, increment to the list that's maybe not that size, right? So maybe we have a list of 5 items, we're trying to do list index 10. It's not going to work because that list only has 5 items. So that's actually an example of an index out of range error. And so I'm looking to the code for element in range. So another instance where element is going to be like a number. Element is 0 to the length of list. And so if not, so this is indexing into our list, right? And modulo 2 equals 0, like we did similarly for the previous homework. That's how you can tell if it's like an even number, right? Because if 2 goes into it, you are an even number. Which actually, 0 is an even number. Did our example have a 0 in it? Okay, no, it's 1. But yeah, so if you didn't do the case with 0, that's totally fine. But so this is saying, okay, so this would mean you are an even number, right? If we're indexing in there the list and we access this item, and modulo 2 is 0, so this is even number. So if you're like not even number, hold on. Alright, so we're back. Alright, so we're checking for an even number, and so it looks like we're removing these from our list. and then continuing on our for loop. And so if you remember pop, or if you don't remember pop, then you should be able to find it here, right? So the pop method, removes the specified index or the last item if the index is not specified. Nice little learnable example: apple, banana, cherry. Pops one, we get apple and banana, so it removes it. And so I'm like, okay. So we're sometimes then, assuming we get into this if, removing an element from the list. So maybe at this point I want to say, to know, like, hey, are we even kind of getting in this condition? And we are, okay, so we're actually able to in the if statement. So then that would mean, since we're iterating it for the length of the list, so we're going, in this case, what's our length of the list? Well, we can do that, the length, so 6, so our range is going up to that, but we are removing elements from the list, so then we're probably trying to index into them when it's not valid. So let's put, let's put something in the 4 right here. So this is what we're indexing by, right? As you can see right here on the line below. And then we'll also maybe want to know, like, the length of the list. So, okay, it's elements going up by 1 as we would expect, right, because we're doing the for loop. And then you can see the length of the list is gradually getting smaller, right, because we're popping out these items. So, it starts at 6 and it goes on to 5 and 4 and 3. But you can see, like, right here in particular, length of our list is 3, but elements 4, so we're trying to index into this list at 4. So, we can have a 3 length list like this, 1, 2, 3. And then if elements 4, so we do something like this, we get the exact same error as expected. So okay, so that seems to be the problem, as we're trying to index into a list but removing elements. So we want all these elements gone though, all the evens. So there's actually multiple ways you could kind of go about doing this. One way that maybe comes to mind is like, return list or whatever is blank, and instead of kind of removing these, what if we just like appended them to it, right? And then return list. Alright, so now instead of removing these items, well, what if we're adding them to this list? And then you may see a problem with this, but hold on. So I look, I'm like, 0, 1, 2, 5, like this isn't correct, right? And that's because we're also appending this element right here. But we actually want our value from the list. So we'll try it again. And now we get 1, 3, 5, and 13. And that's right, because it removes all these, the 2 even, I say all these. It removes the 8 and the 10, right? So, kind of a few problems with this one. We, indexing into an array. I guess, like, you could say, like, improperly indexing into array. You could see something like, out of bounds, out of range, like list size too small, whatever. And then also, initially when we were kind of appending to the list, so in this case it was fine because we're popping, so it takes an index. But then if we're doing our thing where we add to the list, that's where we had to add this to actually get the value of it. So like another problem. Yeah, I guess that's the core problem then, because the other problem got introduced by the solution, so technically you wouldn't have to write that. And a fix could be, another list and add the hogs to it. Would be one way. Or you could do some things where you could tweak the for loop and kind of tweak more of the body of it here, so you didn't have to just make this other list, right? So other solutions for it, but we're going to go with that one because it's fairly straightforward. But as you can see, we did some print statements to try to trace some of these values of LM and the length of the list and stuff, and that's honestly a pretty common problem too when you're making modifications to a list in a loop. Having these index problems as you kind of add to it and remove it, because you may not be getting the value you expect, or you may just not be getting a single value at all because you're indexing into it when you can't. But in that latter case, you actually get the runtime error. So maybe it's a little more. I'd rather have that kind of error than a more logical one. Yeah, so that's it for all those. Hopefully it was some good debugging. Hopefully you learned something. But if not, then you got some experience debugging a bit of code that wasn't yours. Maybe that was a new experience, because it's very real. And for the for the final function, I just really wanted everyone to kind of get experience with list. So the last function in lab 4 is titled syllables, and it takes in a word, which is a string representing a word that's separated by hyphens based on its syllables. For example, the word example could be put into the function as example. It should return 3 since that has 3 syllables, which I had to Google to confirm because I was not too up to date on my syllables. Like most functions, there are many ways to solve it, and for this one I definitely agree. In particular, I wanted to include this one to familiarize you with the split method for strings in Python, which we haven't really needed to use at any point up until now, but I will say, especially for kind of prototyping and doing stuff in JavaScript, which we'll be doing in the follow-up course, PUI, that split I find might be like my most used kind of method. For splitting up lists, for parsing strings and trying to find things, or cases like this where we want to break up a word or some input or something based on certain characters, such as a hyphen. So I was like, if we don't really use split, I still want to make people aware of it somehow. So I thought we'd just throw in a tiny function that, and even just explicitly drop it, right? I didn't want you to have to go figure out split could make this really easy. I just wanted to draw it to your attention and get you to use it, even if it is a really simple example. So yeah, that's kind of what the rest of this is getting at. And so return's fine. So you can actually do this in one line, but then we'll do value. So we have a word, which is a string. We know it has these hyphens. Split, and then if you actually check out the documentation for how to use split, you can pass it in a separator right here. Separator when we're splitting the string, default value is white space. So then it gives you some more examples here of we want to split by a space, and so this is 2 characters, which is totally fine. We're splitting on that, so it splits it right here, splits it right here, gives us a list of 3 items. So we can go back to ours. So I can use that as my separator, right? And so, for example, it's going to split right there and right there. So then I have a list of 3 items, which is also what we're going to want to return. So then, if I want to know the count or whatever, val is now a list. So maybe we'd want to name it better. Right, and so it's going to have, for the case of example, it's going to be 3. So we're going to have and so we want to return that there's 3, and so you can get the length of the list actually, right? Because it'll give us 3, because that is a list with 3 values. We can return it, and of course we should test it. so what kind of error was that? And actually too, some IDEs, so we're using idle, right, Python, but there's other kind of environments you can program, like Python and other languages in, and a lot of those will kind of complain if you have a variable that you haven't like assigned to yet or even used. So some might catch that. Syllable. And we're getting 3. Yeah. Oh, it is, yeah. Actually, I totally see that. The screen can cut off. I like really hate this laptop setup. I'm also like on the floor right now. Yeah, and so we want to also test it with another case. So I think the example was like hyphen. Can't spell. Hyphen. We get 2. So the same case, and also if you did want to make it just like a single line for whatever reason, word split like that, right? So that gives us a list, and then we want the length of that list. So then we pass it in, and then this should give us the kind of same results. There you go. But again, especially since we're not trying to go for like efficiency or anything, it is kind of better to separate in variables in terms of readability and kind of debugging. Like if I did get an error for some reason, or if I left this code and came back to it, I'd have to be like, okay, so we're splitting by this on this input word, which is going to, give us a list, and then we want the length of this list, so it becomes a little less explicit, maybe kind of harder to reason through, in my opinion at least, when you try to condense things to one line, so never feel like you're like wasting a variable per se or something like that. Because I think readability is huge. So even if it's just you looking at your code, but I'm looking at the code too and I grade it, so readability is always nice. But yeah, and you can solve this one line. You could do it the 2 variable way like I did. You do 1 variable and you do whatever. Yeah. And there's like some other string kind of methods you can use. I think like index of might be one. Where we got strings? Oh, we don't have that nice little table that has all these. But yeah, so I won't dive on that tangent, but there's like another way you can kind of solve this without using split, and that's kind of another reason why I want to make it explicit, because split, there's like a JavaScript equivalent for that, and it works in like pretty much the same way, and I think it might be useful for all the prototyping and whatnot you'll be doing soon. So I wanted to include that, and yeah, I think that's it. We have that homework out right now, and I'll go pull that up for a second and maybe talk through some of it. I also kind of talked about it too, like the intention with the different functions. But again, this is our topic is kind of like combining conditionals and loops and like lists and like these novel and kind of deeper ways than just something like, hey, check the age or check the value of this input parameter. So that's what these are kind of getting at, where you'll be using like conditionals and loops and likely lists. Like the input for this is even a list to kind of solve these problems, such as finding the medium. And again, so some of these, it might be made easy by like some functions in Python that we have like talked over before, or you could kind of like implement them in other ways. So to find the median, it's like the middle value of a list. That is a sorted list. So, and we talk about, like binary search and insertion sort in the module this week. So, you could like actually take that code that sorts the list from like OLI, and you could use that as a helper function even to kind of sort your list when you're trying to find the median. So that's like one thing you could do, or maybe there's something else you could do on it. Popular names, I did kind of want to get at more like of some like string comparison type stuff that is case sensitive. So again, kind of working with these lists and iterating them through. Again, same with adding pairs. There's like I always say this, there's just so many ways to solve different problems. And I think there's like a fairly like efficient and smooth way that makes adding pairs like pretty easy, but there's also more of kind of like a brute force way. Like if you could think that, hey, if you want to find the biggest pair, you could literally go through each element of this list and add 1 to 2, add 1 to 3, add 1 to 4, add 1 to 5, and keep track and see which is bigger. And then we could go and, all right, let's add 2, 2 to 3, 2 to 4, 2 to 5, 2 to 6, 3 to 4, keep going like that for all these combinations. But that becomes increasingly hectic and gets long if our list is longer, right? So maybe there's a more efficient, kind of smoother way to solve it that you can do. But I guess that would work. Then coin flip, I really wanted to get people used to kind of doing helper functions with your code, so splitting up the concept and kind of logic of their code into different parts. So this one flips a coin, so it's fairly small and straightforward. Actually, all of these are fairly small, but then you can combine them in this one to call this one, which would call this one, which would call this one, and so they all do some nice kind of things. But it's all kind of compartmentalized in the function, right? And I think for our next two homeworks too, we'll be making use of more kind of like, instead of just like code this function, okay, move on to this next one and just code it. We'll be having these functions that kind of build on each other, because it'll be a tiny bit more like project-y based. And so instead of kind of solving like 5 independent functions, you'll be working toward one goal, and maybe making 5 or maybe making some more depending on how much you need kind of functions that should call each other. But again, it's one of those things with programming too, where you could just have like a huge 1,000-line function, but it becomes hard to debug, hard to kind of read even. So there's a lot of problems with that. But I mean, they're out there. I unfortunately have to work with them sometimes. But it's so much nicer when everything's kind of in its own compartment, because then if I'm not getting, if I work through this first, I can test it. Okay, I'm getting results. I know this function's fine. And then I work on this one. I test it. Okay, I know this function's fine. Now I'm on flip success. Oh, I'm not getting this output I kind of expect. Well, I know coin flip's fine. I know coin flips is fine. So that means somewhere probably in this function there's a problem, right? Because flip success calls coin flips, which calls coin flip. So then if I'm getting like some weird error here or something, I know it's just kind of contained, right, in this function. So it makes it a little easier to debug than if we have like all of the code in a single function. So it kind of helps us pinpoint that. So that's another kind of like third advantage, right, of having code like this. Yeah, so that's it. Sunday I'll have a little better setup. I'll actually have 2 screens and like a desk and a mouse. So I will definitely do like the full office hours then. Hopefully we'll have some questions on the homework. If we don't, I'll probably do this style where I kind of try to logically break down the homework like line by line, kind of, without like coding and giving away the examples of just how I might think through it. So I'll probably do some of that Sunday, in addition to any questions that y'all might have. And again, I'll be keeping up with Piazza in the meantime. But yeah, and I think I mentioned this too, but grades will likely come out later, like probably Saturday. I haven't had much time to grade at this conference I'm at, but I'll be going home Saturday. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. And I think Sunday, let me double check before I say it. I think the Sunday office hours are the usual time. They should be, yeah. So that's the same. So I'll do more of the kind of logic-y where I like do comments and say, okay, this line tells me I should do this. This line maybe says I should do this for the homework. that I know I sometimes do Thursdays after lab, but due to my terrible setup and my time constraints right now, I'm going to save that for Sunday. Also, there really haven't been questions on the 4th homework, so I don't know if that means it's easy or if people haven't started yet or what, but I guess I'll say it's a good thing. So, but yeah, if you have any, definitely feel free. Don't forget about that quiz that we have in OLI, the usual kind of quiz thing, due tomorrow. And upload a screenshot of that if you could. Just makes it a little easier to grade. Because it'll make this like grade column in Canvas and all, and say you had a submission, so it's easier than trying to like go to the OLI grade book and go back to Canvas. Because I actually do grade it in OLI, because I obviously want to see your answers and whatnot, not just that you did it. But yeah, so that's kind of everything logistic-wise and whatnot. And the homework should actually come out on Sunday this week, because I'm going to a different conference Monday, and we'll be busy, so I definitely want to get those out Sunday. And I have an idea that I ran by someone and I want some feedback on it, but I think it'll be more like you're going to be working on like a game, and it's going to be comprised of a few functions, kind of like coin flip. So instead of doing the one-offs, it'll be like, these 5 functions make up this game that you will likely already be familiar with. But I think it's a good example that kind of incorporates these conditionals and these loops we've been working with, and even lists and variables, and a function calling another function. And there being like so many ways you can kind of implement it that I think it'll be fun and right amount of challenge, and kind of incorporate what we've learned. And then by the time you're done with that homework, it's like, I have this game we kind of made. So I think that'll be cool. And hopefully like the same kind of difficulty and time as these other homeworks. I'm not trying to make this one harder or anything. I just think it's a slightly different style. Yeah, so waiting on some feedback for that too, to make sure it is of the same kind of time and all requirement. But yeah, that's everything. So I'm gonna sign off, and I hope the audio quality wasn't terrible, and I hope that the resolution wasn't that bad. And yeah, Sunday we won't have this problem as much, so looking forward to that. Have a good weekend, and again, if there's any questions on the quiz or the homeworks or even the lab, or hey, why did you do this in the video or whatever, totally feel free to post on Piazza. Yep, see ya.